Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast, where I give you practical Stoic advice for modern times. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/Simon Drew. I also do one-on-one mindset coaching, and you can book in your first free consultation by going to risetothegoodlife.com/coaching. On Facebook, you can join my group, the Practical Stoic Mastermind. But for now, enjoy this episode. Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast. And today we have a very special guest. I felt kind of bad because I had to reschedule this interview so many times with the lack of internet that I had over the past week or so. But we've been practicing Stoicism, and I finally got him on the show yesterday, and I'm so excited to have him on the show, Peter Spiegel. Now, I was actually on Peter's podcast, the Simply Health Me podcast. He's such an interesting person, such an amazing learner, such an amazing educator as well. And he's a health coach, but I'm going to give you a bit of a spiel about Spiegel here. So Peter Spiegel, Master of Education, is an educator, father, health coach, personal trainer, and co-founder of the Simply Health Me podcast. Now, the Me actually stands for Maine as well, because it's a community-based podcast in Maine. He teaches clients to relearn how to learn by rediscovering their personal love of learning. This essential skill leads to self-education about disease prevention and treatment so that minor changes in lifestyle can have dramatic long-term effects on health. His focus is the interconnectedness between weight loss, sleep, mindfulness, and exercise as they improve human longevity and health span. It is his firm belief that education at all ages is the path to long-term wellness and happiness. And this is why I'm so excited to have Peter on this show. He's also an avid fan and studier of Stoicism. And I'm just so excited to have him on and to talk about health and Stoicism and everything that he loves and education. So without any further ado, I present to you the amazing Peter Spiegel. All right, so Peter, ever since I was on your podcast, I've been really excited to have you on my show. I think this is going to be a beautiful blend of Stoicism, philosophy, learning, and health, and everything that is good in life. And so, Peter, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of who you are and what you do?
All right. My name's Peter Spiegel. I was an educator for 15 years in a suburb outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And when my wife and I chose to move up to Maine, I transitioned a little bit away from education, although, as she would say, everything is connected and nothing is benign. I'm still an educator, although now we focus on health. She and I started simplyhealthme.com a little while ago, and we work with the community and individual clients to use my education skills and use her medical skills to get people healthy. And we're trying to take the best information we have available and just really individualize it for someone, because everyone's different.
No, I like that kind of approach there. Just quickly, I mean, I've always felt like there's just so many different diets out there. There's so many approaches to health. There's so many approaches to strength and conditioning and everything. But there doesn't necessarily have to be one size that fits all. Like I think everybody's different. I really like that approach of going at it, saying, okay, what's the right approach for you? And I definitely want to get into the health side of things in this podcast, because I do really enjoy talking about health, even though it's about Stoicism. This podcast, the Stoics still would want us to be healthy, so it's a good opportunity to do that. But maybe we could start with Stoicism, because I know that one of the reasons you reached out to me was because you're very interested in Stoicism yourself and you've been studying it. And I wanted to know, when did you first become interested in Stoicism?
Ooh, good question. It was definitely, I was younger, and then I put it aside for many, many years. So I had read Seneca's On the Shortness of Life years and years and years ago. And then once I started becoming an educator and teaching every day, I started realizing these things that I was putting into practice or thinking I had thought of myself were actually Stoic principles. So I can give you one example. When I interviewed for the job that I ended up having for many, many years, the principal asked me point blank, what makes a good teacher? And in that moment, I didn't even hesitate. And I said, a reflective teacher is a good teacher. Any teacher worth their salt is going to reflect on their practice every single day. And when you think back on all of the things that they reflect on, that list is endless. There might be 10,000 things in a single school day, during the day, in the middle of a lesson, in the middle of a sentence, telling some child to put their hand down or something like that. They might even be reflecting on how well that went. So all of a sudden, I start realizing that to become a better teacher, I had to not only reflect on mine, but help my practices, but help students start understanding that in order to learn, they had to reflect on their process. And that became just one of the big cornerstones of my pedagogy for years, for the 15 years I was teaching.
What was the kind of process that you would go through to reflect on your teaching and become a better teacher as you went through?
Okay, so I'm not sure we have enough time for that. So let's see. I would start my school year about 3 weeks earlier than a lot of the other teachers because of the kind of pressures that are put on teachers to collaborate with others. A lot of time is just taken up during the day. You never really have a lot of time alone. I would start my year about 3 weeks early and try and spend as much time by myself in my empty classroom. As soon as the custodians had it scrubbed, cleaned, washed, I got in there, moved everything around, and started playing with the organization of desks and start thinking up of lesson plans and think about lesson plans that didn't work the year before and how I would reword things. I would go through every morning. I would come into class during the school year. I'd come in 45, 50 minutes early, sometimes 2.5 hours early, and stand in front of my whiteboard and do a mental exercise of, well, I'm going to pretend I'm the class today, and I'm going to try and poke holes into all of my lesson as possible. I'm going to be the idiotic 12-year-old in the, Mr. Captain Obvious sitting in the back row, trying to get a rise out of me.
Negative visualization, just to point that out.
Constantly. And then ask myself, well, did I respond well to this? Was I able to redirect that student into a positive situation? At the end of the day, my number one goal was to have kids going home at the end of the day desperately wanting to come back the next day. And if I did that, creating that sense of urgency to be here in the moment and control that moment. Again, all of this is Stoicism. It's just stuff that I thought I had thought of myself, and I had not.
Yeah. No, I love that. There's definitely some Stoic principles in there that you were using. I'd be interested to hear kind of about transitions with students that you saw where they came in at the start of the year just not wanting to learn, really not enjoying their time there, but maybe at the end of the year they were actually enthralled by the class and excited to be there. Did you see any kind of kids have that kind of transition?
Every kid has that transition at some point during the school year, in not just my class, in any class or in every class. You and I were talking before we started the interview that very often kids don't know what they don't know. And when they get to that moment, it becomes very confusing and frustrating. And they're not even sure, especially at the age I was working with middle school kids. So this is ages 10 till 14-ish, mostly 11 to 14, but sometimes a 10-year-old would sneak in. And finding a way to get a student just to relax and embrace the moment of learning, embrace the process. So you have to think that at that age, when kids are coming into middle school, they're coming out of a developmental stage. According to Montessori, she would say they're coming out of a stage of very concrete thinking, that this concept of thinking abstractly is still very new to them. And that would be my responsibility to kind of help guide them and build that bridge into adolescence a little bit. So, how I would be reflecting on how well did I challenge them? How well did I engage every kid to get a smile out of them. Sometimes it's just as simple as a smile to break that tension, break that stress. And how the Stoics deal with stress on letting things go that you can't control.
Yeah.
That would come up constantly. And once a student trusts you, and once the entire class trusts you, because you have to build trust one-on-one, but then there's this collective trust, then all of a sudden learning emerges. It becomes a self-organizing system. And that's something that an Indian researcher by the name of Sugata Mitra talked about a lot in his research on students can lead their own education, but the conditions have to be right. And it is the responsibility of the teacher and the educator to create those conditions for learning to flourish. Kind of if you're a gardener, and if you do everything properly and you get the right amount of rain and you plant the seeds on the right day, it's going to grow. I'd be able to walk out of my classroom down to the principal's office and knock on his door and say, hey, you've got to see this. And he's like, why aren't you in your classroom? I'd say, no, come on, walk with me. And we'd go down. I said, just look in there. Just poke your head and look. And kids would be engaged with each other, and the learning would be happening. It didn't always happen. Sometimes I'd be going down there going, I need an extra hand. There's pandemonium going to help. But I would reflect on that and see how that could go. My biggest take-home point for my students would be that their grade was not in the record. The grade was in the reflection. And I would tell that to them all the time, that I'm not grading you on what score you got on your test. Because I make a point that everyone reaches a certain standard for those scores. But what you're graded on really is your reflection of that test, or that reflection of that assignment that you had. What do you think about it after it's all said and done? Therein lies the lesson, therein lies the learning, therein lies your process.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of reminds me of the difference between like the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. You know, you might get a terrible result on your test, but then what do you say after that? Do you say, well, it's just because I'm stupid? Or do you say, well, that just means that I have to work harder next time to get a better result?
And you got to be careful with growth mindset, because a lot of educators, and it became a buzzword, and people just started throwing growth mindset around education circles. And what growth mindset really is, it's a very nuanced reflection on your process and picking out actionable things you can do next time. Not instead of just saying, oh, just keep trying next time, you'll get it, huzzah. No, that's not growth mindset. That's
you have to have the reflection with it as well.
Right. And you have to be honest about it. There has to be open and honest eyes on your work, but not being judgmental about it.
How do you think people can do that? Because I want to talk about that, because I often talk about how the Stoics encouraged us to be judging ourselves in what we're doing, and make sure that we're putting ourselves under very tight scrutiny, because we want to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. But this also needs to be mixed with self-kindness. And not judging ourselves to the point where we, are in so much pain from what we've just done because we're so angry at ourselves. Like, did you have kids in your class, for example, who just really took it terribly when they got a bad result, and they were so hard on themselves? And what do you think is the antidote to that?
Okay, so yes, dealing with middle school kids in this very affluent suburb, I would have kids that had never had a B on their report card in their entire life, a B plus. They'd never even gotten below an A minus. And sometimes in my class, they got a B plus on something. It happens. And I definitely had students have meltdowns in class in front of other students, sobbing and crying. And you have to move quickly. Again, this is one of those reflective moments. You have like, uh-oh, I have to do something. And you get that student out of the classroom. You first of all lead by example, and to get that kid to come back and ask themselves the why question. Why am I learning about this? And what is important in this learning? And that is a great place to start, is asking those why questions. And if you have an answer of, I don't know, that's perfectly fine. that's a great place to start, because then you can start learning how to ask better questions. And it's that process of learning how to ask questions is what can get you to be judgmental about the right things and kind about the right things. Because we all want to do well, but we also don't kids are learning and adults are learning as well. As you become an adult, you so often forget these basic lessons from your youth when you get into the grind of the adult world, that you often forget that it's okay to say, I don't know, or it's okay to say, man, that didn't go the way that I thought it was. And sometimes just reframing the conversation like that, instead of saying, I failed, I'm never going to get into Harvard. I'm like, you're in 6th grade, kid. It has no bearing if you're going to get into Harvard or not.
Yeah.
But to start back there and to go forward from that point is it's hard, but it's satisfying for kids once they can get coached through that.
And I want to point out, you mentioned, changing the language around. And that's something that I appreciate so much about the Stoics. I mean, just the simple act of, for example, they would encourage us to stop saying, I have to do this, but instead to say, I get to do this. And this simple change in your language can completely change the way that you perceive things, and therefore the way that you act, and therefore the results that you see in your life. It's just another example of them being so ahead of the curve, in terms of NLP and mindset coaching and that sort of stuff. But I wanted to move. Sorry, go on.
Well, I was actually thinking, you just reminded me that the very first lesson of my class would be a shift in perspective on that very first day. And it basically, I would run them through a math problem. And for kids doing math and geography, they're a little going, what's going on here? But I would have them, I'd ask them, how long does it take to get to know someone? How long is the school year? Oh, it's a year long. And then, of course, Captain Obvious in the back raises his hand or her hand and says, no, it's actually only 10 months long. Okay, great. So I write 10 months on the board. And then someone else says, no, it's actually only 180 days. I'm like, great, we're on the right track. So keep writing these numbers down with me. Okay, so it's not 180 days. How much time do we spend in my classroom? Well, it's 50 minutes a day, 180 days a year. Okay, add that number up. You have how many minutes we spend together as a class. And we add that all up, and it comes out to 6.25 days. So right from day one, I've shifted the perspective from thinking that instead of my class being a year long, it's as if we took a week's vacation together, drank all the Mountain Dew we could possibly drink, and I had to teach them everything that I know about geography in those 6.25 days, and get to know all of them as an individual and learn from them and them learn from me, and to appreciate each other and to laugh together and have inside jokes that only that one class will ever know. And then at the end of that 1 week, we all go off and we never get together as that group ever again in the history of the universe. And that's pretty powerful stuff to kind of shift someone's perspective. And the reality is time only goes in one direction. So when I ask the kids, guys, when I'm in the hallway going, get here, get here, get here fast, we only have so much time and it doesn't stop. I'd put a prism in my window in the classroom and it would have a rainbow shining onto the whiteboard. So I'd put an X at the start of this conversation with the kids. And that by the end of the 10-minute conversation, that rainbow had moved 4 feet across my whiteboard, illustrating how much time had already moved and that we don't get back. And I'd blow their minds one last time. I'd take the number of days and divide it by how many days old they are. So the percentage of their life that they spend in my class and how small it is, which is less than 1/1000th of a percent. And that number gets smaller as they get older. So it's just a really long-winded way of saying shifting in perspective from day one is really important.
It's almost making me feel like sad, like as in like they only got to spend that much time, in the class. But I can, already see just how much emphasis you would put on not only teaching the kids, but also providing the mindset and the situation where they're able to learn in the best way possible. And oh my gosh, I wish I was in your class. That sounds awesome.
There'd be a lot of boring days too. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, I'm sure. No,
but we'd have fun. We would have fun.
Well, it sounds like it. That prism idea is amazing. I love that.
But I love rainbows.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't?
Exactly. They make me happy. And smiling is important. Starting your day with a smile makes everything better.
I completely agree. Actually, when I did a few, I did a few sessions where I went to schools and spoke to students just about mindset and everything, and students particularly who are transitioning out of grade 12 into the real world. And every time I did that, I would start by getting them to stand up and reach their arms up into the sky and look up at the ceiling. And I challenged them to not smile after doing that. And every single one of them was just like laughing and giggling and smiling, because you can't not smile when you're doing that. And I'd start every session like that, because it's, oh my gosh, it makes you just feel great. But I wouldn't mind transitioning now from the teacher's perspective to now learning ourselves, and maybe people who don't necessarily have a teacher but want to become really good learners, just on their own. Because I know that it does require a lot of discipline, but Stoicism does encourage us to really put wisdom and education at one of the highest priorities in our life.
Yes.
So how do you learn? What's your process, and what do you think is the most effective way to learn something new?
Well, wow, that's a loaded question.
It is a loaded question. I'm sorry.
You weren't kidding before when you said you were going to ask me all the hard questions.
Well, you've got to stop providing so much value here, because then I expect you to know the answers to everything else. So.
Well, the reality is, depending on the subject, everyone's going to learn somewhat differently. For me, I treat myself not as a hungry learner. I'm ravenous to understand the why of things. Why is that? And I'm going to quickly go back to my classroom just for 1 second to kind of bring it in, is that when I would try and get students to get into the mindset of wanting to learn, wanting to be here, which is step one. If you want to be here, it helps. But also telling them the scientific truth about what's happening in their brains in the moment. So that process of coming out of concrete thinking into abstract thinking, being honest about what we know about the science of what's happening. So in my own brain, what's going on as I'm learning something is a nice little metacognitive step that I use to help get my head around new information. So when I find something new, I have to be honest and say, I don't know anything about this. Let's start. I'm not afraid to go down the Wikipedia wormhole. I am a huge fan of the Wikipedia wormhole. I think it's perfectly acceptable. If you're getting started learning about something for the very first time, go ahead and click on Seneca's link. And by all means, give yourself 5 minutes of reading. And if you feel like you want to click on something, you should click on that little blue hyperlink and see how far down the wormhole you can get. You might end up at the Merovingian Empire in Central Europe in the Middle Ages or somewhere else, but everything is connected. So as long as you're reading and learning, that's going to be step one.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you.
No,
I love that. I love going onto Wikipedia and just getting lost. I used to assign it to kids and say, okay, here's where I want you to start. Your assignment is tell me where you stopped. Like, where did you get? Come back in tomorrow, and it'd be completely open-ended. And it's just a tool to get yourself, and then you can reverse engineer. Well, how did this connect to that first thing that I started with?
Yeah.
So when I started learning about health, I had to go right back to organic chemistry, and I'd be listening to some of these really technical podcasts, not knowing any of these words. Okay, Google. Okay, Wikipedia. And then I'd just start clicking on things. I'd click on a link and say, oh, well, that's what that molecule looks like now. Okay, I'm not going to remember it, but I had a chance to be exposed to it. And that exposure over time builds a foundation.
Well, what I think I love most about this advice is, firstly, it's extremely practical. Secondly, it's like if you just want to get a skeleton, of what you're learning, and get the foundations down, there's nothing. I completely agree. There's nothing wrong with just going on Wikipedia and getting that that very basic information there. But it might even go a little bit deeper. But it's something that I don't do ever, but now I really want to do that, just with random things that I want to learn.
What's great about Wikipedia, and I know that a lot of my educator friends would be down on using it in class, but I would say no, it's an opportunity to learn and teach about what does citation means. So you can actually go and everything in Wikipedia, if it's not sourced or cited, you can be skeptical about that information. But if it is sourced and cited, you can actually go down and click on the citation, and it'll bring you to an external link of information that can corroborate what you were trying to learn about. So and that is a great teaching tool right there, is to teach about how to be skeptical and methodical in your learning process, because most of us learn online these days. Very few adults learn about anything by opening a book anymore.
Yeah.
Either listen to podcasts, or we have our cell phones and we look it up on Google or Wikipedia. If that is how we are learning, then we should learn how to use that better.
No, absolutely. And I really wanted to ask you about how a person can get to that stage where they do really want to learn, because obviously you place a lot of emphasis on that. I think it's extremely important. And so how does an individual, get there by themselves into that state where, yes, I now really want to learn? Obviously you'd probably say, well, if you don't want to learn about something, then you probably never will. But how does a person maybe transition on their own? Like, has there been anything in your life where you haven't really wanted to learn it, but then you've kind of thought, okay, well, this is really important that I know this, so now I need to get into the stage where I do want to learn? I don't know if there is an answer to this.
If I had the answer to that, I would be a very rich man. And it's very difficult to find an answer to that. Geez.
This might be one of those opportunities for us to both say, well, we just don't know the answers. Let's
learn
about it and come back to it.
It is. I don't have a good answer, because everyone is an individual and will learn slightly differently. Starting from a place of honesty, of asking yourself why you want to learn, that is a good thing to. And once you can answer why, then you can start digging deeper into, okay, well, how can I go about doing this? Just being honest is probably the best thing I can say. That there is no good way. I wish I had a better answer for you, and I don't.
That's absolutely acceptable. You've been on fire, right, for all this time.
It goes back to being the lead learner in your classroom. My purpose in class was never to know more than the kids sitting in front of me. It was to coach them to become inquisitive, lifelong learners. That was one of my goals. So, I might impart some personal experience along the way, or like a witty remark or something like that. But the most powerful tool that I have in my tool belt was to say, I don't know, and then own that statement, and just really just say, I have no idea. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Where do you think we should start? And then throw a question. And once you start developing the capacity to ask good questions, and I mean questions that lead yourself into more nuanced questions. I hate yes/no questions, or questions that have an answer that you can look up and online and say, oh, questions like, how tall is Mount Everest? That's a yes/no question to me. Or a better question would be, how did Mount Everest become the tallest mountain in the world?
That is a great question.
That's a much better, and that's a different kind of question. So again, it's all of that perspective shifting, of getting yourself into the mindset of saying, okay, here's a yes/no question. How can I ask it differently to kind of start asking more questions around it? And if that's how I would teach learning to my students, and that's how I kind of go about my day, is that if I find myself with, okay, well, the answer is blank, I want to kind of know the why of blank or
Mm,
whatever it is.
yeah. No, I like that. And I'm
Not only
deaf.
that, sorry, but not only that, but like if you try and go and answer some question, you're gonna by espousing some irrelevant or incorrect information, you're gonna look like an idiot.
Mm,
You're
yeah.
not gonna know what you're talking about. Instead of just saying, really I have no clue. How
Mm,
do you think we should find the answer?
hmm. Yeah, I think I was actually recently reading something from either Seneca or Epictetus, where they were talking about how the only thing worse than a person who doesn't know something is a person who doesn't know something and they know that they don't know it, but they are so stuck in their ways that they won't admit that they don't know it.
I
And
think that
it's
was
like,
I want to say that was Seneca because I was just reading Seneca earlier today, and
yeah,
it sounds like one of his rants.
it definitely sounds like one of his rants. He's
He really
amazing.
does stuff.
I also wanted to. I just remembered that you mentioned on the shortness of life earlier on in our conversation, and I was going to point out to everybody listening. I mean, if you haven't read On the Shortness of Life, it's a very underrated work from Seneca. Definitely get to it because it's just beautiful,
It
beautiful
it's my
writing, and
favorite. It's my favorite.
it's so it really stabs you in the heart straight from the start where he says, it's like it's not about having a long life, it's about having a good life and
Hmm.
when you
And
start
to
reading that sort of
let
stuff.
once you let go of the things you have no
Mm,
control over
yeah.
and start living here in the now. So, when you're here, be here. It's going
Mm,
to make it that much better, that much more enjoyable. And when I'm working with my health clients now, though, that's the kind of thing that I ask them to do. I ask them to enjoy the moment with me.
mm,
Be
yeah.
here. Be with me. Put your phone down, turn it off, talk to me. Let's
Mm,
share some laughs. Let's actually get excited and happy about learning this stuff. And once you
mm,
start getting them into a positive place, wow, does you light a fire under their butts.
mm. And
That's as close as
maybe
I'm going to get to a swear today.
no, that's fine, but maybe that's also a part of becoming a person who actually wants to learn is learning to put down everything else and focus in on maybe one thing at one time.
Mm.
Like 'cause I know that so many times throughout the day, I find myself I'll be watching something on YouTube and then I'll be messaging someone on my phone and then I'll be thinking about what I have to do at work the next day. It's like let's just try and do one thing at a time, be in
It's
this
funny
moment.
it's funny you should mention that because everyone says that they're multitaskers. Oh, I'm a multitasker.
Hmm.
Like, well, actually, no, the science doesn't actually support that statement.
Hmm.
Humans are not multitaskers. We're really good at switching between single tasks,
Hmm.
but we cannot multitask. So
Hmm.
when you are watching a YouTube and then you're also texting someone, you're losing information between both of those things
Hmm.
in real time. That's actually happening. I
Yeah.
do it all the time myself. I'm reminding myself at the moment to stop doing that.
Hmm. Well, something that I've been noticing recently is I just bought Dan Carlin's Wrath of the Khans to listen to, which is, I don't know if you know of hardcore history. Um,
I was just listening to the whole hardcore history on my bike ride earlier today on the Eastern or the Pacific theater of World War II and
hmm.
the evolution of the Japanese culture.
Yeah, yeah. The
Fascinating.
supernova in the Middle East, is that what it's called?
I
Or
think that's Supernova in the
yeah.
East. That was the
Oh
one.
yeah, sorry, in the East. Yeah, so I noticed so I really wanted to listen to Wrath of the Khans, and it's been recommended by pretty much everyone who's ever listened to Dan Carlin, and so I bought it, and I was listening to it, and every time I'm listening to it, even though I really want to be learning this stuff, even though I'm really interested in this, I cannot help but notice that if I'm on a run, there'll be times when I zone out for like 30 seconds. Or if I'm going on a hike and I'm listening to it, I'll zone out. Even if I'm just driving in the car, I'll zone out and I'll be like, crap, I have to put it back 30 seconds or a minute. And it's like, even though podcasts even are one of those things where you should be able to do it while you're doing something else, really sometimes you should probably just sit down and listen to something
Yep.
and just be thinking about that, maybe even take some notes.
Which
And
is why I end up listening to podcasts 3 or 4 times because I'm often doing
yeah,
something else listening to them.
Yeah, exactly. So you gotta pick up little bits of extra information as you go. But maybe this is a good time to go into your podcast now, because I'm interested to hear about why you started the Simply Health Me podcast, and also
Okay.
I really want to learn from you about how you think philosophy and Stoicism can play into a person's overall health.
Okay.
Because people might think, well, it's just about the mind, strengthening the mind, getting wiser. But obviously, it's going to link to your health. A strong mind is going to create a healthier body. But I want to hear from you how. Yeah.
So those are two questions. I'll start with the Stoicism question,
Cool.
and learning about health. Stoicism is just one of the many tools I have in my tool belt. It is not the only tool that I have in my tool belt. And the more I remind myself of that, the easier it is for me to sometimes switch gears if I need to. Stoicism provides me a grounding point to kind of step back every once in a while and say, okay, all of this is really confusing and stressful. I can't control most of it, and I can now notice the things that are stressing me and step back from them and approach it then again maybe from a different perspective. So as far as learning about health, being able to let the clutter of the world that we seem to have built around ourselves, being able to kind of create a protective bubble around myself, I definitely credit to Stoicism in that. And it has helped me become more present with the food that I'm putting into my body in the moment, and to make an intentional choice about, if I am fasting, what time am I breaking? Am I listening to my hunger cues? And if I am listening to my hunger cues, well, have I already made a healthy decision about what I'm going to fuel myself with? And it's going to be different depending on the day. So, yeah, that would probably be my take on how Stoicism has really helped my health journey so far.
Yeah, I love it. And so your podcast, why did you start
Yes.
it? What's been the response so far, and what's been the most rewarding aspect of it?
The most rewarding aspect is I convinced Emmy to join me on the podcast. My
And
wife,
for those who don't know, Emmy is your wife, right?
yes, Emmy Liscord, MD. She is the other half of the Simply Health Me podcast. We had been getting, we wanted to be change agents in our community. When we moved to this region of Central Maine, we wanted to be able to help people be better and in a healthy way, and because that creates a better community for everyone else. And we found that this area doesn't have as many resources as Boston would, or as New York would, or any of the larger cities. And if anyone was going to do something, it would be us. We both got interested in biohacking, in trying to, how do we live longer, better? And it's not necessarily living longer, it's just living well for as long as we can. And once we started looking at the research behind it, it became obvious that there are some people out there in the podcast world that are talking about bits and pieces of it, but there are very few that are trying to bring it all together, and bring it together in a way that you don't need to have a college education to understand it. Because it's very intimidating to try and learn something for the first time. And as you said before, listening to a podcast and 80% of it's going over your head. It's really, really hard to get excited about the newest research that's out there. And if you don't know what the multisyllabic words mean. So we saw this as an opportunity for us to learn about it ourselves, and then also be able to kind of digest and synthesize and paraphrase it in a way that could help our community. We started it just as Simply Health Me is for Maine. ME is the abbreviation for our state. And it's starting to grow outside of Maine. It's in every state now we have downloads. And actually, that's wrong. There are 2 states that we don't have downloads. Wyoming and Alaska. I'm looking at you guys. Come on, download it. Come on, someone from Austria is downloading it now. Come on.
That's actually one of the funnest parts of having a podcast is seeing the different countries
Yeah,
that are downloading, and then maybe seeing the countries that aren't downloading so much. Like I think I have like 6 or 7 downloads in Russia. So one dude started listening and then just didn't really like it.
right.
So,
Yep.
yeah, it's like
Exactly. Or you'll get one download from, geez, where was I had one download from Mongolia.
wow,
I
yeah,
was shocked. That was wonderful. I
yeah,
hope they got something from the
yeah.
podcast. I hope it was one of the better episodes.
But what I
But
really
now,
love about what you're doing with your podcast is like when I started my podcast, I didn't really have this community feel. It was like I'm just putting it out here. I don't care where the listeners are as long as they're listening and getting
Mhm.
something from it. But I really like this idea of starting a community based podcast where you're focusing because this is something that can go so global. But to
Mhm.
focus in and say this is just for my local area and how can I contribute to them, I think that's a really cool idea.
Well, the way in which we're going to make a difference with this epidemic of obesity that we have is to start small. We
Mm,
have to find a way to start in our local communities. I want people around the world to listen to this, but I also
mm,
want them to say, "Oh, yeah, I could just go down to my local supermarket and talk to the local grocer and buyer."
yeah.
It's not You can do that in your
Mm,
community. Just the fact that I'm talking about my local grocery store doesn't mean that it's the only grocery store where someone can go and talk to the buyer. That's
yeah.
just the example that I'm currently using. And the feedback we get from it's been great so far. I'm really encouraged that we're going to make a difference in the future as we keep on. We're 45 episodes into this now, which is great.
Mm. No, I love it, and again, I just think it's so cool to start with that community mindset, and it's a
We're
great way
only
to,
going to we're only going to be as good as the community around us.
yeah,
And we go out and we see the health issues that are going on in the community. One of the reasons why Emmy wanted to start to do this is she's an emergency physician. She sees the end game result of
mm,
a lifetime of metabolic dysregulation and unhealthy eating habits, unhealthy physical activity habits. But the thing is, 80% of what she sees can be reversed through nutrition and minor adjustments to health.
mm,
Now, imagine if we could take 80% of emergency room visits out of the equation and the amount of money that our local community is saving and our
mm,
hospitals are saving and our individuals. So, instead of having, obviously, the United States is a very difficult medical model, healthcare
yeah,
model.
to say the
Um, I
least, yeah,
and I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but if people were really thinking about the bottom line, if companies were really thinking about the bottom line, they would really be trying to make these basic changes in health and nutrition that the science is pointing us to.
mm,
Things like a well-formulated ketogenic diet or
mm,
a higher fat diet, lower carbohydrate diet. That's what obesity medicine is teaching right now.
mm,
Including information about Dr. Sachin Panda's time-restricted eating windows. And it's
mm,
not necessarily, if you want to lose weight, yes, intermittent fasting or some extended fasting is great. But once you get to a healthy weight, you do still want to practice a restricted feeding window to keep
mm,
your hormones, your endocrine system functioning optimally. And if we're looking to optimize our health and longevity, we should be taking these things into account. Decreasing stress by going to bed early and not bringing the phone into your bedroom with you.
mm.
I'm guilty. I'm guilty of doing that still, but I'm still learning. I
Uh-huh.
know that there are habits that are hard to break. So yeah, it's important that the message gets out there that it's all connected. It's
Mm,
not just, oh, I need to change my food. It's like, yeah, you do, but you also need to change what time you go to sleep at. You need to
mm,
change the conditions of your bedroom. Mindful practices and stoicism directly relate to stress.
mm,
Our bodies and our brains have not evolved to differentiate between the stress that a lion is attacking you or not getting enough likes on Instagram.
yeah.
Your body doesn't differentiate between those two different types of
Two
stress.
very different types of stress.
And think about the kind of stress that we have in our life right
Yeah.
now is all, oh, I only got 2 likes on my Instagram photo that I thought was really awesome.
Hmm.
And that your body's going, oh my gosh, I'm stressed out now. And cortisol jacks up, and cortisol is obesogenic. It'll hinder or completely block your insulin from going down. So if you're trying to lose weight and your insulin's jacked up, it's not happening. You're going to inhibit lipolysis. You're not going to burn any fat for fuel. It's all connected.
Everything. That's why I asked before, what's the link between like philosophy and Stoicism and health and everything. And yeah, I think that's so important for people to recognize that it is all connected, and particularly with the stress aspect. Like, that's why, whenever I talk to anybody about their health, I kind of like to talk about mindset first. And you
I talk about sleep.
Sleep first, yeah.
I ask them what their bedroom is like and
Definitely
what their sleep schedule is.
Yeah, it completely changed my life when I started actually focusing on it more and saying, okay, maybe I do need exactly 8 hours of sleep a night. Let's just try and get that. And let's not go to bed at like 12. Let's go to bed at like 9:30 or 10 every night. But
you can record Game of Thrones and watch it tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. But, I even tell people, when you come into the gym, forget about getting on the scale. Don't get on the scale afterwards, because then what you're going to do is you're going to get some weird result that maybe you're a little bit heavy, or maybe you don't get the result that you want. You're going to stress out over that, even though it means absolutely nothing. And that's not the purpose of you going in there to work out. And you're going to stress out. You're going to actually store that fat, because of the stress. And there's so many links to everything here. I absolutely love that you're creating that kind of community that focuses on that everything is connected. And
what you end up learning, especially with when you just mentioned weight, if you do weigh yourself a lot, all of a sudden you'll recognize that your weight changes anywhere between 3 and 6 pounds over the course of the day, every single day.
Absolutely.
So you might, and even if you weigh yourself at the same time every morning, if that's the only place that you weigh it, you're still going to fluctuate. And so it's more important to start recognizing that weight loss and health journeys are not linear. There's nothing linear about getting healthy. It's stumble forward, stumble backwards. You basically have to imagine that you're a drunk college kid trying to find your way home. You're not going to get there in a straight line, and that's okay.
Absolutely. No, I like that. It is okay for it to not be linear. And something that for example, I tell people when I take them through the gym that I manage is I tell them, listen, the only reason that I ever want you to get on that scale there is so that you can then go over and put it into this machine that's going to tell you your body fat percentage, going to tell you your muscle mass, tell you everything else about your body that you actually that'll be helpful for you. Because it's not going to stress you out. It's going to give you helpful information. But I wanted to go a little bit into your daily life. I know we've not got much time left. I want to be respectful of your time, but maybe
we can talk for as long as you want.
Okay, well, looking at about 6 hours from now, that'll be...
The kids are asleep. That's fine.
Okay, awesome. I was wondering if you could tell us about any daily habits that you have which disproportionately contribute to a happy life for you, or a healthy life, or an overall positive life that you're living.
Yeah, there's lots actually.
Maybe the top 3 or 4.
Well, my bedroom has blackout shades, and I absolutely love them. I sleep in a dark room and a cool room. I like my room. I have either a fan on me. We don't have AC. Well, there's one room in the house that has AC. Here's another one that I don't think a lot of people will recognize, that, especially if they're in a marriage or a committed relationship. Everyone seems to think that we should sleep in the same bed, in the same bedroom. And that's not necessarily the case if you're in a married couple. My wife and I, we don't sleep in the same room. And we're perfectly happy doing that. We have an incredibly happy marriage. The bedroom is for 2 things, sleep and sex, and that's it. We've said that on our podcast many times. And it's one of those things where you have to recognize where if a partner in your relationship, if one of the people is not getting a good sleep, possibly because of the other person, that you need to be honest about it and say, well, my sleep is really important. And also your sleep is really important to me. I want my wife to have a good night's sleep. And I'm very conscious and mindful of that. And we talk about it. And you know, for a long, before I got healthy for a few years, I was a active snorer every night. Since I've made this transition into health, I've stopped snoring. So it's perfectly fine when, I mean, I will sleep in the same bed in the night, but sometimes I want to have a good night's sleep because she sometimes gets up in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be mindful of it. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't think is okay. There's a lot of social stigma around, people often will think that there is something wrong with a relationship or something because people may, couples may not be sleeping in the same bed. And I think that's just hogwash, honestly. You should treat your sleep as something important to you, and
Yeah.
your partner should support you in that.
Well, I think what's so interesting and awesome about that kind of habit that you have is that, yeah, it is one of those things that will bring up weird emotions in people. They'll kind of question it and think,
Yeah.
well, they can't be happy then. But what it points out is also that, happiness in your relationship is also not linear, just like health. There's no one size fits all for everybody. And I mean, to make a judgment that you wouldn't be happy just because you're doing that, you might be even more happy because you're both getting a perfect night's sleep. And
Yep.
I absolutely love that. I think that's really cool. It's
She likes to go to bed at 8:30 at night, and I like to go to bed at 9:30. If
yeah.
we tried to go to bed and she has a hard time falling asleep,
Mm-hmm.
if there's someone else in the room,
Yeah.
why would I want to force bedtime at the same time as her, or even any? I appreciate her and her needs, and I want to make sure that that's priority number one.
I don't think I'm going to be able to sell this to my wife, but I will say that what's interesting is that I'm thinking about this as we're talking about it because, I mean, I get up usually around 6 to 7 o'clock in the morning, but my wife, she's definitely she likes to stay up until about, midnight or maybe sometimes 1, and then she'll get up at,
That
8
was
or
me
9.
for years.
Yeah, and so we really do clash on that level of like, well, I want to go to bed now, and then she's going to go to bed later, and then I'm going to get up, and maybe she'll wake up when I wake up, and it's a really interesting thought. I like it. Maybe you could tell us about any resources or books or podcasts. I know that you have an awesome podcast there, and I really would encourage people to go there. I'll put the links in the show notes, but if somebody wants to learn about optimum health on all levels, what are there any books that really stand out to you or websites that really give you that foundational information that you might point people to?
It's hard because a lot of the podcasts out there start from a pretty high level. If you,
We were just
I
talking
know,
about this, how I listen to Rhonda Patrick, for example, and then
right?
most of it goes over my head because I just don't know the terms. But
Yeah.
for the average person.
Rhonda Patrick's Found My Fitness is a great podcast. The Peter Attia Drive. I think those two are really at the cutting edge of the science, and they're interviewing the cutting edge of the scientific community as it relates to health right now. Those would be my big. I like Brian Williamson. I do. I think he does a great job, especially the Ketogenic Athlete podcast. Brad Kearns, he's awesome, a former triathlete, and he's teamed up with Mark Sisson from Mark's Daily Apple. That's a really good place as well. The list is really, if someone wants to get started on a weight loss, I would say start with reading Jason Fung's book, The Obesity Code. That really gives a different theory, a hormonal theory to weight gain, and it's what the Obesity Medicine Fellowship is teaching now. It's like it's what is science now. Some people might say that he's he's self-promoting and he's selling his book. Like, good, he should sell all the books he wants. The science is there. I don't have any problems with that.
It's such a scarcity mindset when people start talking like that. Why would you not want somebody to be successful in what they're doing if they're pouring all of their efforts into it? And it makes no sense to me.
This guy, he's come from 20 years of watching people die because of obesity, and not being able to get off of their diabetes medication. So I think that his life experience and working with patients is definitely has got a lot of credibility to me.
Mm, absolutely. And
There's a lot of other books I just can't, off the top of my head, I'm having a
no,
hard
I
time
think
coming up with them.
that's a great place to start. And then I want to know, where can people find you? Uh, Tell us everywhere that they can kind of get involved in what you're doing.
Okay, so our website is simplyhealthme.com.
Mm-hmm.
We're also on Instagram, simplyhealthme. Then Emmy is simply underscore health underscore me, or Maine, I think is hers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at GeoSpiegs because I was a geography teacher, GeoSpiegs.
I love
I'm on,
that.
yep, always will be a geography teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Twitter and Instagram as, oh no, wait, Instagram is PSpeaks because my GeoSpeaks got hacked a while ago. Oops. These things do happen, right?
They do happen.
People can send us an email at info@simplyhealthme.com, and we're on Facebook, our Facebook group. So
Awesome.
you can find us there at Simply Health Me, and you'll see a bunch of rainbow chairs next to a river, which is the public chairs that are down on our waterfront in our little town of Hollowell, Maine.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I absolutely love that picture, and it just looks like the best place to sit down. So,
It is. So that river, the Kennebec River, has such an amazing uh, appearance to it. And it's different every day. We're 50 miles inland, but we still get 8-foot tides.
wow.
It's wonderful. And so we'll get fog coming in the mornings. It'll
Mm.
burn off. It overflows its bank. We actually got flooded this past winter when an ice dam broke.
Wow.
So in the fall, all of the colors. We're in New England, so we have the best falls in the world. Autumn here. So
I want to be
I,
there.
well, when you're here, we will definitely get together. I'll take you up to Baxter State Park, and we'll hike the Knife's Edge at Mount Katahdin.
Okay, that sounds literally like the best thing in the world to me. I love any kind of hiking. I feel like when I settle down in America, when we move there, I'm going to have to take a big road trip around visiting everybody who I've kind of met through the podcast.
So Mount Katahdin is the end of the Appalachian Trail on the northern end. It's Maine's tallest peak, and the Knife's Edge is it's a descent while you can go up or down to the peak, but it's only about 20-ish feet across, and you're got a cliff on both sides. It goes down several
Wow.
hundred feet. And when the weather is gnarly, we got socked in the clouds in fog, and the wind was whipping 30, 40 miles an hour around us. And people were upset, were saying to us that, oh, you didn't get to see the view. I said, no, we got to see a different planet. That was
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
You take it as it comes. It's Stoicism again.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get to see a view. We got to see something no one sees. And it
Yeah.
was amazing.
Mm. No, I completely agree. That would just be absolutely beautiful. And I have one more question for you,
Okay. Shoot.
and it's gonna be a tough one. But I do like to ask this question to people. I often ask it: if you could send one text message to every person in the world, what would that text say?
Go to bed.
Ooh, I like it.
Just everyone's got to start from that first position of you got to realize you got to get sleep. It seems to be the number one predictor of health issues and longevity. Just in all of the studies, it's sleep. If you can start with sleep, if you're going to do one thing today, it's put your phone down. If it's after 9:30 at night, put your phone down. Start a bedtime ritual. Charge your phone in the bathroom. Oh, but I use it for my alarm clock. So what? The alarm's still going to go off, and you're going to have to get up and go turn it off in the bathroom. And then you're going to be up, and you won't hit snooze. Go to sleep. Try and get those 8 hours. Get 10 if you can. But, obviously none of us can really get 10 these days. I've got small children.
Well, I think that's extremely practical and actionable advice. And I think it's a good place to end the podcast. So, Peter, thank you so much for coming on. This has been
Thank
an
you
awesome
so much for having
conversation.
me.
We're going to have you back another time. And
Anytime you want.
Love it. And as I said, everybody, I'll send you to the links in the show notes. And Peter, talk to you again soon.
Take care, Simon.
All All right, so there you have it, my interview with Peter Spiegel. I think you'll agree that he is such an interesting person. He has such a depth of knowledge, especially about education. I really loved talking to him about education and learning and the way that he learns and the way that he teaches. Such an amazing process, and I think that there was just so much value in that interview. So I'm really grateful to him coming on. And as I said, I've got all of the links that you can follow him and follow the podcast as well in the show notes. So just head there. But otherwise, I'll talk to you guys next time. But until then, I hope that this episode has helped you on your rise to the good life. Ciao. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Practical Stoic Podcast. I hope it's been valuable for you. And if you'd like to support the show, then you can go to patreon.com/Simon Drew. If you'd like to try mindset coaching with me, then you can book your first free consultation by going to risetothegoodlife.com/coaching. To join the community, just go to Facebook and search for the Practical Stoic Mastermind. The links to all of these places are included in the show notes, but for now, this is Simon Drew signing out.